Well, hey everyone. Welcome to episode 303 of F-Stop, Collaborate, and Listen with your host, Matt Payne. This week, I had an amazing time chatting it up with one of my favorite photographers, Sigfrido Zimmermann. Sigfrido is an ecologist for his day job and a fantastic nature photographer in his spare time. He combines his knowledge of ecological processes to make some really stunning images, which is what we talk about in this week's show at length. Before we dive in, I have a few announcements. First up, I want to let you know about a workshop that I'm co-leading for Munch Workshops with my friend Joseph Roybal to White Pocket in Arizona from June 6th through June 11th. White Pocket is hands down one of my favorite places on earth. The workshop is focused on night photography, but we will have plenty of opportunities to make stunning images throughout the course of the day as well. The workshop includes hotel accommodations, food, posh camping accommodations, and lots of time to review images and processing techniques. If you're interested to learn more, just head over to munchworkshops.com for more information or find a link in the show notes. I also wanted to take one moment to thank our latest Patreon supporters. Terry Jones, Mika Boynton, Tom Baptiste, Chris Wyman, Lynn Pitts, and Steve Rosendahl. These 6 awesome individuals joined an exceptional group of people who are financially supporting the podcast on Patreon while gaining access to bonus episodes and early releases for the podcast. If you too would like to support what we're doing, please head over to patreon.com/fstop and listen. Thanks in advance. I appreciate you a lot. Okay, let's get to this week's episode with Sigfrido Zimmermann. All right, Sigfrido Zimmermann, it's awesome to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Matt. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, I think you've been recommended by like 97 of our guests, and literally every time someone's like, "Oh, you should have this person on your podcast," people DM me on Instagram, Sigfrido Zimmermann. I'm like, yes, I know. He's amazing. I will get him on for sure. And here we are.
Well, that's really nice to know. I'm really happy to be here. I've been listening to your podcast for a few years now, and you've interviewed some of my favorite photographers, and some of, more importantly, you've introduced me to so many new photographers, and I really appreciate that. I'm really happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, I think you'll make a fantastic addition to the old library here. So.
Thanks, man.
Well, so for people that aren't familiar with you and your awesome photography, I would love for you to tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I'm Sigfrido Zimmermann. I'm a marine biologist, and I love spending time in nature and photographing nature. I'm from California, and I grew up in Los Angeles, and I'm currently living in Ventura County right now. I'm a husband to a beautiful wife, and I'm a new dad. I have a 4-month-old right now. Yeah. It's a steep learning curve.
And you're not sleeping at all.
It's gotten better. It's gotten a lot better. Yeah.
It's like that 3-month mark is pretty sweet.
Yes.
At least it was for me.
We've definitely noticed a change in his sleeping patterns. Yeah. For the better.
Yeah, nice.
For the better. Yeah.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. And I've been photographing for 2011. So,
okay.
Yeah. 11 years.
It's about when I started too.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, that's cool. Awesome. That's all amazing, and I know we're going to touch on every single thing you just discussed in more detail.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wanted to kick us off with a really just rough and tumble question. I want to hear how, and more importantly, why Sigfrido got into photography.
Yeah, so there's a bit there. It's a big question. So, ever since I was young, I was really interested in nature and biology. It kind of stemmed from growing up watching BBC documentaries about wildlife and flipping through Nat Geo magazines and listening to my dad tell his stories about his time working in a natural history museum as an ornithologist in El Salvador. So he has all this crazy stories about his time in the field, and I kind of like idolized this lifestyle of adventure and travel and spending times outdoors. So I was always interested in photography, but I think I didn't start until 2011 when I was like 19 or 20. During my childhood, I think I was distracted with sports and video games, you know.
Of
Um,
course.
yeah. So I was a sophomore in college and I wanted to take a photography class, but the catch was that I needed to have a DSLR to be in the class, and I didn't have one at that time. And I think I ended up telling my dad, and my dad went out that Christmas and got a Nikon D90 from Costco. It came in a kit
Oh,
with like
oh
two
yeah.
lenses, and it was supposed to be the family's camera. But I think he knew, like, and I kind of knew that that camera ended up being mine. I was the
Let me
one that
guess
was,
the 18 to 55 and the 55 to 200.
it was the 18 to 55 and the 70 to 300.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah. Um, so yeah, I had a DSLR in that spring semester. I enrolled into a photography class, photography 101, digital photography 101. And they covered all the basics like exposure triangle, simple rules of composition, and a little bit of the history of photography. And we would work on projects, exploring like different shutter speeds and all that stuff. And I was hooked. Like I was so hooked. All I wanted to do was photograph. Um, so much so that that semester I did poorly in my chemistry class. Um, so yeah, I was having a good time, and I would photograph everything, from people, street photography, even though I didn't know the genre of street photography, and like birds and flowers, whatever it was. And around that same time, I was also starting to go on hikes on my own and plan backpacking trips with my friends. Because before that, it would be like family trips, uh, you know, to family camping trips and a day
Yeah,
hike here and there.
sure.
So it's kind of like this perfect timing of combining these two growing passions of photography and outdoor activities. And like many of us,
And
I think you as well, Matt, you
I was gonna
started
say,
off, yeah, hiking and wanting to document your adventures in the outdoors. Um,
yep.
yeah. And
Yeah,
then,
that resonates a
yeah,
lot. And I did the same thing. I was like, I took my camera everywhere, photographed everything I saw in sight. And I think that's important when you're first starting out because it helps you kind
right.
of hone in what you're interested in.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it took a couple of years of me like exploring, but I always knew I preferred nature photography. And I think around 2015, I decided to, I don't know, something clicked and I just wanted to fully concentrate on landscape photography. Um, didn't want to be like, jack of all trades, master of none kind of deal. And yeah, ever since then, I've been photographing here in California mostly. My whole portfolio is from California, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's been a fun ride.
Yeah. And fast forward to 2022, almost 2023 now. Like, why do you make pictures now? Because I'm sure it's evolved.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, now making photos is a way of expressing myself that words can't say, or I can't write them or say them. It's just a way of expressing myself. And that's the main drive for me right now.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah,
Love it. I mean,
yeah,
that's what an artist does, right?
yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, awesome, man. Well, so you said you're currently a biologist.
hmm
I would love to learn a little bit more about how the connection between your scientific research and your photography. Like, what is the combination there? And maybe start out by telling us about your scientific area of research.
Sure, sure. So I'll give you a little bit of my like scientific background. I got my master's at Cal State Northridge. I was studying coral ecology. So ecology is the study of how organisms interact with other organisms as well as their abiotic um, surroundings. So their physical surroundings, temperature, soil, depth, things like that. I was working in a lab during my master's that studied coral reefs, called the Polyp Lab, and we did a lot of work out of Moorea in French Polynesia, as well
Hmm.
as St. John in the Caribbean. Because there's no corals out here in California, so we had to travel to those places and
Right. Sounds terrible.
oh, you know what? It was it was very hard, long flights. You're carrying all this gear, but it was awesome. Mid 20s, I was having the time of my life traveling to these places, and we would go several times a year um, for weeks at a time. Ranging from like 4 weeks all the way to 12 weeks.
Wow.
Um, yeah, I think 12 weeks was my longest trip. When I actually did that when I was in undergrad. Um, and I worked with my PI was Dr. Peter Edmonds. He's a very he's a well-known coral biologist and one of the hardest working persons I know. And he does a lot of work looking at the effects of ocean acidification on corals, as well as increased seawater temperature on corals. And when we would be out there on the islands, we would work on our projects for our master's thesis, as well as work on his projects.
Right.
And we would do a lot of field work, um, and he has he has this project in St. John that he's been studying the corals there for over 30 years. So he's amassed this massive data set, and you can kind of see the trends of declining coral cover from when he started. Um, so it's a lot of fun, a lot of field work, a lot of time spent in the water.
So it's my guess is like temperature and pH levels and things like that.
So increased seawater temperature has a negative effect on corals. The thing that
Right.
happens there is corals have a symbiotic relationship with an algae called zooxanthellae, and this algae provides nutrients to the coral through photosynthesis. And corals also feed with their little tentacles, but they need a lot of the nutrients from the zooxanthellae. And what happens when there's an increase in seawater temperature, the coral gets stressed out, and for some reason it just expels all the algae out, and
Hmm.
that's called coral bleaching. So the zooxanthellae is what gives the coral a lot of its color. So when it expels, you'll see those photos of those really white coral. So it's lost a big portion of its nutrients, and it's slowly starving. Sometimes they get them back, but if they don't, they that's a way corals end up dying. And acidification is another issue where, um, in short, the corals use calcium as their skeleton, and there's a lot of organisms that need it, that have shells and all that stuff. And basically, because of the ocean acidification, it makes those um, things that need calcium more brittle, in a sense.
Right.
Yeah,
And not to get too far in the weeds,
yeah.
no pun intended, but what causes the acidification of the ocean?
It's the carbon mixing with the ocean, with water in the ocean. There's
So
a
the more
chemical process
CO2 in the atmosphere gets absorbed into
into
the
the ocean.
ocean.
Yeah, and there's a chemical process where there's calcium. There's a limited amount of calcium in the water, and there's the process where the carbon mixes with. There's a chemical reaction that takes the calcium out of the and the animals can't use that to build their shells or their skeletons. Yeah.
Gotcha. And yeah, I remember I listened to a podcast once where they were talking about the acidification of the ocean and how, like, if it goes unchecked, basically we're gonna deplete our planet of oxygen.
Yeah,
Is kind
because
of the potential end result because we get like 70% of our oxygen from the ocean.
yeah, and a lot of that comes from um, phytoplankton, and phytoplankton does use calcium, and I guess without that, it would be a pretty bad thing if we lose phytoplankton.
Right. So then, how does your interest in coral and algae, how does that tie into your photography?
So I think it just all ties in. I'm a curious person, and I love being in nature, and I'm kind of trying to design my life where I could be out in nature as much as possible. And being a biologist gets me out there, and my hobby is also nature photography, and that gets me out in the field as well. It's just trying to be, you get paid to go diving. That's pretty cool. Like right now, so after my master's, I got a job at UCSB um, as a diver working for a PhD student that had a project in aquaculture, and he was looking at growth rates for different seaweeds to be used for food consumption.
So I'm curious then, are a lot of your photography subjects marine based then?
No, well, so I mean, I wish I had an underwater setup.
Yeah.
There's a couple reasons I don't. Uh,
Well,
yeah, the equipment is very expensive,
oh, it's
but
really
you
bad.
know, but also um, I'm I dive a lot, and I dive for work, and I have hundreds of dives that are work dives. And when we're underwater, we're carrying all this stuff like transects, dive slates, quadrats, collection bags. I've even had to take down an underwater drill before. Um, so I can't imagine carrying a big rig with a DSLR or mirrorless camera
Right.
underwater, and
And lights.
yeah, and lights and everything. And then on the
Right.
weekend, the last thing I want to do is go diving.
Right, right, right,
So
right.
yeah, so I've tended to go to the deserts and mountains, and I do go to the coast sometimes, and I do like taking photos of kelp canopies, like abstract
Yeah.
photos of kelp from the surface.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's probably what I feel like you're most well known for is those types of images.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
they've done pretty well, um, especially in the NLPA this year.
So I'm curious then if it's not the marine subjects that you're so focused on, how has being a biologist helped your photography?
Oh, yeah. So I think one of the biggest skills for a biologist is observation. Having good observational skills and curiosity can go a long way. Uh, one of the first things one of the first pieces of advice that my advisor told me when I started my master's programs, it was my first day in the field, and he said, all I want you to do is go out for a swim and just observe. That's it. So as I developed my observational skills, I feel like that translated to my photography. Because as a biologist, you're always wanting to ask questions and notice patterns in nature. For why is this coral only grow at certain depths? Or that's interesting. I only see this um, manzanita growing on the north side of the mountain. Why is that? Something like that. Um, so owning those observational skills, I feel like have helped me um, pick out smaller scenes in nature, and that's what I like doing, taking photos of the small scenes in nature. That and being a biologist, you come with a background knowledge on a lot of ecological processes and life histories of certain um, plants or animals, and you could maybe notice certain things out in nature that without having that background knowledge you might miss.
Can you give us like one example in your from your own photography where your knowledge as a biologist or your observation skills as a biologist uh, helped you make the photo, or maybe otherwise you wouldn't have noticed it?
Yeah, there's a few. There's one photo. I like spending a lot of time in Sequoia National Park in Kings Canyon,
Hmm.
and there's a photo I have. It's an abstract photo of a sequoia, and the bark is burnt. And I kind of like that the abstraction of the dark bark with that cinnamon color bark, and it's a foggy morning, Um, and the first thing that caught my eye was that burn scar. And knowing a little bit of the life history of a sequoia, they need fire to reproduce. And I'm not talking about high severity fire because that burns everything.
Right.
I think Sequoia experienced some pretty large fires these last 2 years or something like that. But a moderate fire is beneficial. And out here in the West, a lot of the ecosystems have evolved and are used to periodical fire. So the burn scars drew my attention, and it kind of gave me an idea to make a composition out of it. And knowing that without the fire, these sequoias wouldn't reproduce because the cones sense the heat of the fire. Once the fire is done, they release the seeds and they drop into the soil, and they need this mineral rich soil after a fire to grow. And it removes competition for the little sequoia saplings to get a foothold, essentially. Things like that. And there's so many other ecological processes, and I like tying projects to certain ecological processes, and we could talk more about that.
Yeah. Well, before we move on,
Yeah,
I want to ask maybe one or two more questions about the science
sure.
side of your work. So, for those of us that aren't scientists, maybe we just have a passing interest in the life sciences. How can knowledge about ecology, biology, and natural history of the environment enhance or aid our photographs?
Yeah. So let me start off by saying you don't need to have this knowledge to make creative and impactful work, you know? I think
Totally.
humans are genetically wired to feel good in nature. Like you could show someone a photo, you could show someone that's not, uh, you know, an outdoorsy person or doesn't spend time in nature, a photo of a beautiful oak tree or a majestic well, and they'll have like an emotional response to it. And they don't need to know the name or what species of tree or whale
Right.
it is. That being said, I see having this background knowledge is like another tool in your photography toolbox. You know, just like learning how to use filters and Photoshop, Lightroom, etc. Um, as landscape and nature photographers, nature is our main subject. And um, when you know a little bit about how nature works, I feel like that could be very beneficial. For me, I like knowing how things work and around me. So if I'm walking down the trail and I have some sort of idea of what's going on, I kind of have a more of familiarity with it, have a stronger connection with the subjects if I know a little bit more of the life history. So if I'm walking down the trail and I see a chaparral yucca blooming, um, it could be just a pretty flower, but it's also, this yucca has been growing for 10, 15 years, waiting to bloom. And once it blooms, it dies. So it has this one instance to reproduce and pass its genes to the next generation. So that flower is a pretty flower, but it also has more meaning to it. Um, and I like connecting stuff like that in my photography. And I feel like other people that could have this background knowledge on ecology or life history could make those connections. And when for me, when I feel closer to my subjects, I'm I'm in a better mood. And when I'm in a better mood, I tend to make work that I'm happy with. Uh,
Yeah, it's cool. There's here in Colorado there's a plant that grows pretty abundantly in the mountains.
uh-huh.
But it only flowers, I want to say, like 10 years after a really, really, really powerful snowmelt,
Uh-huh.
something like that. I think it's called a century plant.
Mm.
And then once it does that, it's gone forever. Same kind of idea. And it's like once you know that about it, it's like, and you see a huge grove of them, it's like, oh, that means that like however long ago, I probably just butchered the whole thing, sorry, but however long ago that happens, there was a huge amount of water, and that's an interesting story. So,
Exactly. It adds a little bit more complexity to your photographs. It's not just a pretty flower. It has a story behind it. Or it's not just a location, let's say. There's something in the background that
right,
gives an extra layer to your photograph.
right. And I think to your point, the more you have that knowledge, the more curious you're going to be about the subject, and then the more connected you are to the subject, and then the more interestingly you will photograph that subject. So I think it just keeps propelling your images better and better.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, they don't work all the time.
Right?
There's
No,
there,
totally. Trust me.
there's times where I've seen like, oh, there's a burned area and I see like this little sapling of a redwood. And I'm like, oh, I know redwoods do like these fairy ring things. Let me try to capture it. It didn't work out, you know. Uh, but it creates opportunity for you to try and feed that curiosity. And the beautiful thing about biology is when you, there's so much unknown and there's so many questions to ask. And once you ask a question and you have an answer, let's say, that answer usually leads to two more questions that are even more
Right.
nuanced than the first one you started with. It's like this
Right.
endless, you know, pursuit of knowledge. It's it's fun.
Yeah, and I think it helps to propel and keep you interested in photography,
Yeah.
because it just feeds off of each other.
Yes. Definitely.
Well, so I'm curious then, like, what are some very actionable steps that the layperson can take to gain more knowledge in these areas of expertise without, spending a fortune on multiple PhDs?
Well, yeah, definitely don't get multiple PhDs. Maybe just one. That'll be good enough. Joking aside, um, yeah, I okay. So books go a long way. Um, if you, depending where you live or where you photograph, you could easily Google natural history of Rocky Mountains or natural history of the Cascade Range or the Colorado Plateau, and there'll be at least one book on that. And those books are usually uh, like not easy reads, but they're also not scientific journals where it's like very
Right,
dense with vocabulary. They're more uh, streamlined and for the uh, for the public to read.
right.
And those books will contain everything you need to know for the ecosystem uh, you photograph in. Um, so there's that. And when you're in, let's say, a national park, go visit the visitor center. They usually have a book session section with these kind of books in there. And you can pick up a field guide as well, so you have an idea of what you're photographing. That's a good start.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. It just reminded me, like, just yesterday, I went to the Black Canyon of the Gunnison, and there was a sign at one of the lookouts I went to where it talked about why one side of the canyon had a different shape than the other, and it was all about the direction that that side of the canyon faced was, south facing,
Hmm.
and all the heat was radiating off of that side to the other side, which created more opportunity for snowmelt, so that there was more erosion of the soil. So that side was at a less steep angle than the other side. I thought that was like, oh, that's genius.
There you go. Yeah, and visitor centers have a lot of information. Definitely, if
Yeah,
you're in a state park, a national park, go spend some time in visitor centers, look at their exhibits. When you're on a nature trail, don't ignore the plaques that are there.
yeah,
Those are full of information as well. And normally, parks do offer ranger walks, naturalist walks. If you have time, definitely do one of those. They're full of all the natural history of the location you're in. And let's say you're in the Rocky Mountain National Park. Uh, well, that information you learn just doesn't pertain to Rocky uh, Rocky Mountain National Park. It involves the whole Rocky Mountains.
right.
It's the same mountain range, and there are some different uh, habitats within, but for the most part, you're gonna have a good idea of what what's happening, what you're looking at. So there's that, and I would also say, go visit your local natural history museum. Those are full of information as well. So those would be some actionable steps people could take. Strongly
Cool.
recommend books.
Yeah, and I think it can transform your images, right? Like just using my example from just yesterday, normally compositionally I would have excluded more of that other side of the canyon.
Hmm.
But after I saw that plaque, I was like, oh, I actually want to include more of that to kind of help tell that story. And I don't know if it makes for a better photograph, but it makes for a more interesting story told through the photograph. So
Right,
yeah,
right.
maybe it's maybe not better, but different, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah. All right. Well, cool. So earlier you had talked a little bit about working on projects, and I was curious what your approach is to working on photography projects, and how does your relationship with biology influence it?
Yes, I really enjoy organizing and culling my photographs into projects. It's fun for me. And back in 2020, I took a portfolio development course with William Neal,
Oh yeah,
and
perfect.
he's all about thinking in themes and working on projects. I'm not sure if he still does that um, portfolio review course, but he definitely came out with a
He
book.
created a book of
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and that book has everything that I learned on that course. So I highly recommend that book. I think it's called the Photographer's Portfolio Development Workshop. It's
Yep,
great.
yep.
So ever since I took that portfolio development course, I like the idea of thinking in projects. And I try to incorporate all my background knowledge of ecology to spark ideas for projects. So I have quite a few projects ongoing right now. They're all far from being done, and they all revolve around some kind of ecological process or habitat.
Hmm.
Um, so I really enjoy doing that. And they could be small, like 6, 10 image projects, or they could be very large projects that I don't know. I have a couple projects that have no end in sight, but that's okay. I'm not in a rush. I love what I'm doing, and I can see myself doing this for many, many, many years. So there's no rush in that. And um, I do want to say that when I go on a hike, I don't photograph necessarily for these projects. They're in the
Oh
back of
yeah.
my head and everything, but I I just go on a trail and whatever catches my attention, I'll photograph it. And at the end of the day, if if it fits a project, that's perfect. If not, that's okay as well.
Okay, I
Um,
was wondering.
yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
because I've had lots of ideas for projects, but I haven't collected enough images yet to like cohesively piece together one. Although
mhm.
like I feel like every time I go out, I'm like, oh, that would be cool as part of a project. But then I'm like so easily distracted that I just keep going. So,
Yeah.
but I appreciate that you have the discipline to keep it in order.
Yeah. And sometimes I force it. Like I'm not gonna lie. And then if it that image ends up not working, so I've kind of learned the
Right.
hard way of just sticking to my gut. And
But
I,
I
uh
suspect that those failures are helpful in like advancing the project forward.
sure, definitely.
Yeah.
So yeah, the projects could be big or small, and I like tying them to ecological processes. So, for example, one of my projects I've been working on for it's probably like one of my older projects. I've titled it "Where Deserts Meet."
Hmm.
So I really find ecotones very interesting. Ecotones are areas where two habitats, there's a transition zone between two habitats. So they could be really small, like think about the edge of a meadow and the forest, or they
Mm-hmm.
could be really big, like a transition zone where two major deserts meet.
Right.
Um, or it could do with elevation, going from a montane forest to a subalpine forest. There's
Mm-hmm.
always a little transition zone. And what's interesting about these transition zones is that you get huge amounts of biodiversity. because you have species that could, from both habitats in this ecotone. So one of my projects where deserts meet uh, is centered around Joshua Tree National Park. And, we think about Joshua Tree National Park because of the Joshua trees, and that's half of the park, which is the Mojave side, a higher elevation desert. But the other half is part of the Colorado Desert, which is uh, part of the Greater Sonoran Desert, and it's a much lower elevation desert. And they're different deserts. But what's amazing about Joshua Tree is that you could find species from both deserts in this little band of of the park. Uh, so the project is showcasing the plant life that you could find in this small, diverse uh, area. So I like
Gotcha.
coming up with like things like that, and that's a big one. And there's another, uh, for example, there's a small project I've been working on. I'm aiming for like 8 photos. It's called Sculpted by Scarcity, and I really
Oh,
find ancient bristlecones really fascinating. They're one of the some of the oldest living organisms on the planet that are not clonal. Uh, I think the one tree is over 4,000 years old.
right.
So what this project is doing is focusing. It's very abstract photos of the twisted roots, the branches, the scars that these trees have that have been accumulated over thousands of years. Um, this tree, I titled this Sculpted by Scarcity because these trees thrive in harsh environments. Uh, the old the harsher the environment, the older the tree is. When it has like a nicer life, they tend not to live as long.
That's funny.
Yeah, so they're found in really alkaline soil. Uh, they're exposed to extreme temperatures. Uh, they're hit by lightning, strong winds. They suffer a lot, and I feel like that species of trees shows that character through the twisted roots and branches, and so that project is that's another example of a project that I've kind of tied to the life history of a tree.
And there's a lot of those in Great Basin National Park, right?
Yeah, in Nevada, I the closest ones to me are in the White Mountains of California. Yeah.
Same tree though?
Same tree. Yeah,
Okay. I think we have a
I
few
believe.
in Colorado, but they're super uncommon.
Hmm. Yeah, and there's a
Yeah.
couple species of bristlecones. I think there's one in the Sierras as well. But the ancient bristlecone is in the White Mountains in California and in Nevada as well.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's awesome. I think that's timely too. I think just yesterday or the day before, On Landscape released an article written by Theo Bosboom about working in projects, and he has a bunch of actionable steps you can take to improve your photography projects in his article. So I think that dovetails nicely with what we've been talking about as well.
Yeah, that's great. His work is really good, and I do like how, you know, Shaped by the Sea, and then he had a project on canyons. So
Right.
I like seeing those cohesive bodies of work.
Yeah, me too. I'm
Yeah,
just too just easily distracted. I find everything interesting, and so
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, that's not bad at all. It's just different ways of approaching
yeah,
photography.
for sure. Well, earlier you kind of hinted towards this, but I'm curious how and why you've gravitated towards photographing smaller scenes in nature.
It's just I find smaller scenes give me a larger degree of freedom to
Hmm.
show my unique vision or I wouldn't say unique, but how I see the world.
Yeah, yeah.
So, um, I like taking photos of grand landscapes every once in a while when the conditions present itself. And but there's something about intimate scenes. And early on, um, I remember I would be hiking. So I started hiking, so I'm always wanting to finish the trail.
Right. Me too.
Get to the top of the mountain, get to the waterfall, something like that.
Right.
So, especially if it's a new trail, it helps when I've done the trail before, then I don't feel that pressure. But I remember just walking by so many scenes. Well, that I imagine I walked by. Maybe I wouldn't have noticed them at that time.
Right. 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 Right.
But I remember thinking, I need to slow down and whenever something catches my eye, just try to make a composition out of it. And I started doing that, and the subjects that caught my attention the most were the middle to small scenes. And ever since then, I just really enjoy photographing them. It gives me, like I said, a larger degree of freedom to express myself and to show my unique point of view.
And you've completed far fewer trails.
I still complete them.
It just takes longer.
I just walk back at during the dark.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
It's funny because I had kind of the same thing. I probably 20, gosh, I want to say like 2010 through 2016. I don't think I ever photographed a small scene once.
Mhm.
And I'm sure I walked by some amazing stuff,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
oh well.
But you were probably a different person back then, so maybe you would have noticed them.
Yeah,
Uh,
I think that's right.
yeah.
Uh, for
Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
I'm friends with Martin Gonzalez,
Yeah.
and we recently, well, first of all, actually, I met Martin through NLPA.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I remember looking at the winners list, and he had won an award for a rock abstract, and
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, there's another Hispanic guy doing landscape photography. I'll reach out, and it turns out he's in Los Angeles as well. So we've been our friendship started through the competition, which
That's
was great.
amazing.
Yeah,
And then have you hung out with Alberto as well?
I'm meeting him on Wednesday.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I found
See,
out his. Yeah,
we're building community.
yeah, I found out. Well, he's friends with Martin,
Right.
and they went to college together. And his family's down here in LA, so he's coming for the holidays, and we decided to go, the three of us, to go out and get some beers. So I'm excited
Perfect.
to meet him. Yeah.
That's
Uh,
awesome. Yeah, and all three of you guys love to photograph the smaller scenes, which is
yeah,
super cool.
yeah. Oh, so I was saying that I went on a trip with Martin recently, and it kind of happened where I did so many stops along the trail that I lost track of time. And I got back to the campsite 2 hours after sunset, and he's like, "Did you enjoy your hike in the in the dark?" I'm like, "Yeah, it's not bad."
That's awesome.
He's a great guy.
Yeah, that sounds like me in fall. Like I just get distracted and I'm like, before I know it, it's dark. I was like, oops, I gotta go back.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's so fun.
And
Oh,
one
it's
last thing with the small scenes, there's an endless amount of subjects to photograph.
totally.
So you're never running out of subjects, and there's something that you missed, last year that piqued your interest this year. Um, so I'm having a good time. Eh,
Yeah, it was funny. I was listening to another landscape photography podcast that shall not be named, and they were interviewing a landscape photographer who primarily does grand scenic photos. And they made a comment that, like, in a typical trip, they might make 3 or 4 photos in a single day because, you're photographing at sunrise and sunset and you're
mhm.
photographing like 1 or 2 compositions. And I'm like, oh, that used to be how I did it too. But now I'm like, my last fall color trip I did, I think on one of the days I took like 600 images,
Yeah,
and it was all small scenes, like little vignettes of nature, like
mhm.
little macro scenes,
Focus stacked.
focus stacks and telephoto scenes. And
Yeah,
I mean, for me, it's like the more you get into those smaller and intimate scenes, I find that there's much more opportunity to just be engaged as a photographer throughout the course of a day that it's almost impossible to be bored.
yeah, uh, yeah. On my trips, I start off the same way, where the middle of the afternoon would be kind of like the rest period.
Right.
But now
10
I'm
a.m.
hike
to 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. It's nap time
exactly. But now I
or beer
find
time.
myself, yeah, now I find myself getting to camp at like noon, one, and then having a quick lunch and going back out, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
And some
Yeah,
of my favorite
it's
images have been taken in the middle of the day. My kelp images are middle of the day with the polarizer.
oh, there's no
Yeah.
good light in the middle of the day.
Yeah, they're bad images, Matt.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Well, so kind of along those same lines, a little twist on that topic. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the trend towards perfectionism in nature photography because that's something that came up quite oh quite a lot in the judging process of NLPA. There was a number of judges that got hung up on some of the images because, oh, I wish this wasn't here, or oh, if only they would have composed it a little bit differently, or
Mhm.
oh, they too bad they couldn't clone out like these things over here.
Right.
And Alex Nail, one of our co-founders, he was like visibly upset by some of those comments. Like, nature isn't a sterile environment, it's a chaotic
Yeah.
thing. And so I'm curious kind of what your thoughts are.
Yeah. Um, so I embrace nature's imperfections, you know. I'm going to talk about how I view it for my photography. Um, I feel, well, there's a fine balance, I feel like, because you also don't want to leave some distracting elements that could make your image look like, I don't know, you just started photography or something like that, that random branch sticking in.
Right,
But
haphazard.
yeah, but you don't want to clean your images too much where they start looking, at least to me, a little bit too clinical, like they were manufactured in a lab. And
Right.
and yeah, like what Alex said, we all spend a lot of time in nature, and nature doesn't really present itself like that. So I
Not
tend
very
to,
often.
yeah, yeah, not very often. So I tend to embrace those imperfections. As long as they're not distracting from the main subject, um, I'll leave those in. So I'll even photograph trees that are not quote unquote perfect. They have some blemish on the bark, or
Yeah,
blemishes on the leaves, or the leaf has been bitten by a bug or something like that. It adds another element of storytelling as well.
I
The
agree.
the leaves were a little blurry because it was a windy day.
Right.
Leaves move. So I
Right.
try not to get hung up on those details.
Yeah, and I don't know about you, but I don't know, the longer I've done photography and the more photographs that I look at, the more photographs that I make, when you start to see those kind of highly polished, genetically modified images, let's call it that, GMO photography, I don't know. But you start to kind of just notice it. It's almost like you don't notice it because of how good it is. You notice it because of how perfected it's become, and it's almost for me, it's almost becoming like a negative thing.
Yeah, yeah, I like that term. Yeah, and that's
GMO photos.
yeah, and going off what you said, I don't want my audience to be distracted by the thought of, is this photoshopped? You know, uh,
Right.
I don't want that having that distraction. So anything I could do to avoid that, um, I'm all for. And
Yeah.
you just, yeah,
Well, we
embrace
won't
nature's
we
imperfection. Yeah,
we won't dive into the whole editing debate
uh,
again, but
yeah,
I think perfectionism is a different enough subject,
yeah,
and I think we've paid it its justice.
yeah. A side note, earlier you said about like talking about chaotic scenes and everything.
Yep.
So that's another thing. I've seen that term used frequently, and to describe, busy scenes, woodland, whatever it is. Um, but I think those scenes are not necessarily chaotic. There's not like a disorder in that scene. There's order there. We just don't necessarily see it. We lack, the understanding or knowledge to see the order that's happening there.
Right.
So
Well,
nature is
I was
complex. Complex is I like to use the term complex more for those scenes.
I was gonna say, I think a skilled photographer can take a complex scene and compose it in a way that minimizes quote unquote distractions and emphasizes the order within the disorder in a way that's aesthetically pleasing. But I think that takes a tremendous amount of practice and fieldcraft in order
Yes.
to execute
Hmm.
successfully. And let's be honest, like at least for me, it's much easier to come home and clone stamp out stuff that's distracting than to spend an extra 15 or 20 minutes in the field getting it right. So I understand why it happens because
True.
I think it's harder.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's very difficult.
Yeah.
So for people that can pull it off, my hat's off to you.
Hmm.
I mean, I went to the summer of 2020. I went to the Redwoods for the first time,
Hmm.
and we had no fog, which I feel like Redwoods photography. It's like fog is kind of like a crutch because like it just makes everything awesome,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You have that fog that comes in, and it's just so much easier to isolate your subjects. So since I didn't have fog, it was actually nice because it was kind of like a 7 day mastering composition workshop where I had to really, really challenge myself to make images that made sense in that really complex forest. I'm not saying I was like ultra successful with it,
Hmm.
but it's an amazing way to improve your photography is to spend a lot of time in the forest, especially in suboptimal conditions, and try to make sense of it.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's one of the hardest subjects in photography, organizing the complexity of woodland and forests.
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I have a successful woodlands photo, I'm always very happy. Yeah,
Yeah.
because with that one successful photo, I guarantee there's like 45 that didn't work. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Well, you had also alluded to this earlier, but
Hmm.
I know that you like to photograph close to home at the same national parks and the same locations. Why have you chosen this approach to making images?
Yeah. So this started fairly early on for me. Um, I remember I had a long list of places I wanted to go photograph. Patagonia, Iceland, the Rockies. And I was starting photography and I remember doing a couple trips to Sequoia. And I came back with like two images I liked. So as a like 21, 22-year-old college student, I'm like, man, how many flights do I have to take to Iceland and Patagonia to make meaningful work?
Right,
So
like I'm doing the math in my head, and
yeah,
I don't think I have enough money.
yeah. So that's how it started. But gradually, I I like the more I visited the locations, the more familiar I got with. I tend to go to Joshua Tree a lot, Sequoia, sometimes the Channel Islands, Anza-Borrego, all the parks in California. And I like revisiting them, and every time I come back to them, it's just this sense of familiarity. It just puts me in a good mood. It's like revisiting an old friend every time. And I feel like I'm more productive because if there's some different type of light, I kind of have an idea where to be, or if I'm feeling like I want to photograph some mocotillos, I should. This trail usually has this plant I want to photograph, or something like that. So there's that sense of familiarity. There's that sense of um, feeling closer to the location you're photographing that I like. And when I look at my work, I like having a cohesive look to it versus like a patchwork of greatest hits kind of thing.
Hmm.
Um, so I really like listening to Pink Floyd and
Okay.
the Dark Side of the Moon album. I love how the songs just flow throughout the album, and one after the other has like a nice story to it. And then when you listen to their greatest hit album, there's something missing there. It's awesome
Ah,
songs, comfortably numb, and you're expecting like the song after that, and it's something else, and you're kind of like, I don't know if I feel that, as I prefer listening to the album from start to finish. Abbey Road from the Beatles, that second half of the album feels like one song.
Hmm.
So I like having a sense of cohesion in my work and not having like this greatest hits album where the photographs are not so connected. And I going back to the same places, revisiting um, similar subjects, I feel like gives you that. Um, it could you could argue it could get boring, but I'm not necessarily saying you do the same trail every time. These parks are huge. Every time I go to, like, let's say
Right.
Sequoia, I end up doing a number of new trails, and then I'll revisit some old ones just to see what's happening. And you could visit in different seasons, different weather conditions. Uh, Even if you hike the same trail, the light might be hitting different subjects in a different way. So, and also, when I started going to Sequoia or Joshua Tree, I was 20. I was a different person than who I am today. I'm 31, and making different photographs that I was back then. So there's always something new.
Right. Well, and from a practical side of things, I mean, I just went to Antarctica. Of the however many days I was gone, I had, let's see, 8 of those days were travel, right? So those are 8 days that I wasn't making images
Yeah,
out of the total number of days I was gone. So I feel like the closer you photograph to home, the more opportunities you have to just make an image.
yeah, yeah,
It might not be, you know, the most mind bending photograph of all time, but you have more opportunities to flex the creative muscle and to really hone in on the craft.
true, true.
So I know that you've chosen to edit your photographs with a more natural presentation, staying true to the subject that you witnessed. Why have you chosen to take this particular approach with your photography?
So I want to stay true to that I'm the scene and the scene that I'm experiencing. I like staying true to that. I don't want to. I photograph for myself, um, and I don't want to feel good. Like, I want to feel good with the work I present and put out into the world. And I don't want to have the thought of like, I stretched the mountain, I added this, I added clouds. I don't want to be lingering. Personally, it would affect me uh, by not being able to sleep at night, basically. I have an image, one of the oldest images I have in my portfolio, where I removed a tiny stop sign in the far distance, and that still bugs me. That's just the way I like to approach my photography.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. I mean, I have a lot of the same feelings myself, and it's a big reason as to why we decided to create the NLPA because I felt like there wasn't really a format for people that made images in that way. So thank you for sticking to it and for supporting the cause. All right. Coming up on our last questions here, Sigfrido. Who do you recommend for the podcast? Who are some of your favorite photographers that you would like to hear on this podcast?
So the photographers I'm recommending. So I sent you these names before the announcements of NLPA. I had no idea that these three photographers were going to get third, fourth, and fifth place. Uh, so so I just wanted to say that before listing them. So the first photographer I would recommend would be Alfredo Mora. He's a Colorado-based photographer and who works with intimate scenes. His work is um, very nice. He does a lot of double exposures that it takes you a while to realize it's a double exposure, and I like that about his photography. So I highly recommend Alfredo. Another photographer I recommend is Jason Petit. He's a Canadian-based photographer who also does intimate scenes, and his work is phenomenal. I love whenever he posts a photo, and he likes to use metaphors to add complexity to his photography. And last but not least, I recommend Hans Gunnar Aslaksen, who's a Norwegian photographer. I think he's a designer as well, and he also does intimate scenes very well. And he recently started doing some black and white images that are very well done. And those would be the photographers I recommend.
Those are great. Those are all great. And I'm glad that you prefaced it that wrote those recommendations down before the NLP results came out because we had actually scheduled this podcast quite a long time ago and you had come up with those names a long time ago. So I think it's pretty amazing that you predicted three of the top five winners of the NLPA portfolios of the year.
Yeah, I was very surprised, in a good way. Like they're very skilled photographers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's funny. Well, so I'm curious, can you tell us about your fundamentals of ecology Zoom sessions that you're offering to other photographers?
Yes, so these are so I'm considering I'm curious if there's interest out there in the landscape community for a lecture that um, talks about the fundamentals of ecology. The plan is for me to create a lecture that covers all the topics that I find interesting and may be helpful for photographers to have as background knowledge when they're out in the field. And the goal is to have um, photographers use that, and maybe they could start noticing things that they hadn't before on their hikes, and maybe it could help them stir some creativity or come up with a project surrounding an ecological concept. So I would create a lecture where covering the fundamentals of ecology. If there's interest in that, I would be happy to pursue that, and uh, people could email me at my there's a contact page on my website or message me through social media if I'll kind of want to gauge the interest out there for this. And if there is interest, there's possibility of uh, me doing more lectures on more specific topics like desert ecology or mountain ecology, or photographers who like spending time on the coast would probably benefit from knowing about rocky intertidal ecology. So I really enjoy teaching. I did it during my master's degree, and I just um, spreading the knowledge on how our world works is exciting for me, and I wish to share that with others. Um, so if people could also sign up to my newsletter, and they that's where I would announce this course that I'm putting together.
I love it. I feel like there's definitely going to be interest out there for something like that, especially from someone who's actually a trained biologist and an ecologist. So I think that's a great idea, and hopefully you'll get some people listening to the podcast who will sign up to your newsletter and showcase to you that there is interest.
Yeah, awesome. Looking forward to that.
All right. Well, Sigfrido, this has been super fun, and I'm glad we could finally sit down and have this conversation. You're certainly one of my favorite up and coming photographers, and I love the work you're putting out. So keep it up, man.
Thank you, Matt. I'm really happy to be here, and I had fun talking with you. And you're also creating really great work. Um, and yeah, keep
Oh,
them,
thank you.
yeah, keep those images coming, man.
Awesome. You too. Well, thank you to Sigfrido for the awesome conversation. I really do enjoy your work a lot, and I hope that you keep at it. I love how you have weaved your knowledge of ecology into your photography. It really shows. Next week on the podcast, we have a photographer from Chicago, Illinois, Hank Erdman. Hank and I had a wonderful chat about his approaches for composition using all 5 senses. I think you're going to really enjoy it. Well, that's all for now. Thanks for stopping in, collaborating with us, and listening. See you next week.